Well, thank you for joining us today as we begin our fourth book in our study through the minor prophets, the last 12 books of the Old Testament. So far, we've covered Hosea, Joel, and Amos, and today we cover the fourth book of Obadiah. Today, we're just going to introduce it to you. The book of Obadiah is unique for three reasons. The first, we don't know hardly anything about who Obadiah was, where he came from. Hardly anything's mentioned about him other than what we can see here in this letter. The second reason why it is unique is very short. It's only one chapter, making it the shortest book of the minor prophets. That's why we're only going to cover it today and tomorrow. Today's just an introduction. Tomorrow we'll begin and wrap it up at the same time. The third reason why it's unique is that while the other minor prophets spoke messages of judgment and restoration to the northern kingdom of Israel and to the southern kingdom of Judah, this message was prophetic to the people of Edom, known as the Edomites. To understand who they are, you got to go all the way back to Genesis. In the book of Genesis, God makes a covenant with Abraham and blesses him, says, "You'll be a father of a great nation, and through you, through your lineage, the entire world would be blessed." And we later see that he has a son named Isaac as that blessing starts to become reality. And then Isaac finds out that he's going to have two children, Jacob and Esau. It was customary during this time period that the oldest son receives the birthright, receives the largest portion of the inheritance, if not the entire inheritance. When we come to Genesis chapter 25, though, God speaks a prophetic message to Isaac saying that the oldest will serve the youngest, making it kind of countercultural to the customary time period. And when Jacob and Esau were born, Esau was born first. So therefore, he deserved the inheritance. He deserved the birthright. But later in life, Jacob convinces Esau to trade away everything, to trade away his entire inheritance over to him for a bowl of soup. A bowl of soup, that's all it took. And then later, Jacob tricks his father into blessing him and giving him the inheritance. That moment created hostility and division that ultimately led to two nations being birthed. What do I mean by two nations being birthed? So for one, Jacob, who would later become the name Israel, had 12 sons. Those 12 sons became the 12 tribes of Israel. Esau, on the other hand, was given in his lineage, they were given a piece of property southeast of Israel, along this mountain range. God gave them that land to dwell. And while they were prosperous there for a while, and they became the people called the Edomites, Israel was gaining a lot of political power, a lot of strength, and they started ruling and reigning over the entire region. And for 300 years during the Davidic line, the Edomites fell under their authority. They fell under their authority, and Israel did not look upon them very fondly. They kind of oppressed them. So finally, in around the 750 BC era, the Edomites decided to revolt against Israel, against the northern kingdom before it had split, against Israel, and they partnered and allied themselves with the Assyrians. They aligned themselves with the Assyrians, and then the Assyrians kind of ruled and reigned with the Edomite. They were given a king who kind of served as the Assyrian king within Edom. And so they were kind of doing their own thing there for a while. Now, the entire time after the kingdom of Israel had split into the northern and southern kingdom, the Edomites remained hostile against the southern kingdom of Judah because they were closer to the southern kingdom. They remained hostile. They would join in the Assyrians in attacking either one. They would speak ill will of them. And they laughed and they mocked when around 585 BC, King Nebuchadnezzar and his Babylonians came in and conquered Israel and Judah, taking people back into exile. And while that was going on, the people of Edom actually had refugees that had fled from Judah, and they were being held there in Edom. And when they found out that Nebuchadnezzar had destroyed them, they handed over these refugees. That's how little they thought of the Judeans. They hated their distant relatives, and they handed them over laughingly, happily to Nebuchadnezzar. And for about 30 years, they thought they were great. But around 550, Nebuchadnezzar came knocking on the door of Edom and just demolished them and left them without hope, without leadership, without stability. And for a while there, they remained. But in the 5th and 3rd century, a group of Arab people came in off and on during that period and kind of forced them out of their own land, forced them out of their own territory, and they fled westward towards Judea. And they established a new kind of territory. They established a new kind of people group they called the Idumeans, and that's where they kind of set up shop. And in that time period, they had another new king who would kind of rule them as the Idumeans. And around that time, though, they decided that they were going to be subjugated to the Judeans. And so as they're being subjugated to the Israelites in the southern kingdom, they were now forced to leave their identity as Idumeans, as Edomites, and they kind of were forced into this Jewish lifestyle. They were forced to be circumcised. They were forced into the Jewish customs and the Jewish way of life, losing all of who they were, losing their entire heritage, their entire religions, their entire way of life. And the Idumeans kind of came to an end. But one person that you would know is, out of the Idumeans, the Herod dynasty began around 70 BC, 70 years before Jesus comes on the scene. That's where we get the person of Herod and his lineage. And through all that, this message that Obadiah is bringing upon them right after the time of exile into Babylon, this is before Nebuchadnezzar takes them away, as they are looking upon Judah, laughing at their misery, Obadiah comes and speaks a message of judgment on the way they treated their fellow relatives, the way they treated the Judeans, how they treated these people, how they oppressed them, how they handed over these refugees, how they looked upon them with hatred. And he's going to bring a message of judgment onto them. And throughout this short book, two things to think about. While yes, the message of judgment is fallen on the nation of Edom, this is also providing a message of hope to those in Judah, seeing that what God is doing, he's bringing judgment on the way those around them have treated them. So this is going to provide those in Judah hope and a chance of restoration. But ultimately the message here is judgment on Edom. But we see that the ultimate restoration comes, as we'll talk about tomorrow, because as God says that he's going to bring all things back to himself, God's going to restore this land, restore these people. These people, yes, they were living life, they were self-identifying, they were self-sustaining, they were brought into this Jewish customs, they were made to bow down to their gods, they were made to worship their gods, and their entire way of life had to become Jewish. Through that, you can see how the promises of God are working, that God is calling people to himself. And around the time period that Jesus burst onto the scene, these people are now experiencing this new era, this new covenant that's coming, this new established people group, this new established rule and reign, this new established kingdom. And it's through that God is bringing all things back to himself, that God is restoring all things, which is very much what the message of Obadiah is. So I encourage you tonight, read the story of Obadiah, one chapter, and join us tomorrow as we walk through that verse by verse together.